Come to a session of another PEMSA session. Case-based discussion we have lined up is a case of rectal bleeding, and it will be conducted by Dr. Vasurana. He's consultant general surgeon at Base Hospital, Kantale. So Dr. Vasu Ratnavi needs no introduction. He's well known to the fraternity of Peradeniya Medical School. He was a product of our medical school, and during his medical career at school, undergraduate career at medical school, he had he achieved actually as distinctions community medicine, microbiology, pediatrics, and obtained prizes, the Professor Alfonso Prize for Pediatrics, and also Bakuma Prize for Research. And he was also awarded the prestigious
Kaushika's career is continuing towards talking with others. And guys, I remember in 2000 we were in your position, and when we were final year students, these PEMSA sessions started really. In fact, as a student, and I will see that as someone who proposed the, and it was on Wednesdays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. We gathered in the old physiology lecture theatre for PEMSA lectures, and all Peradeniya alumni consultants did all the syllabus in all the clinical subjects, especially gynecology obstetrics and clinical medicine in these PEMSA sessions, Wednesdays and Thursdays. And I was a student then, and it's a privilege beside the stage by the invitation of PEMSA as well. And guys, obviously, you don't need to. I don't need to say that I am enjoying the luxury of home. And please don't make me stand, because even though I appear gentleman like in the part, I'm enjoying the luxury at the home. Actually, it's going to be medicine, surgery, and stuff. Okay. So you can write, read, write, video, anything whatsoever would you like, as you like. There's no copyright. You can do anything for whatever the things that I'm going to say, and you can interrupt me, obviously in a civilized way, if you have any queries and all. So this is partially a true case, but I have made some alterations to suit the thing for your betterment. And our discussion would be about 2 hours, and first hour it will be discuss case, and the second hour would be on some discussions. So feel free to ask questions and do. So can you see me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Oh, yes, sir. Yes or no?
Yes, we can see you, sir.
But I can't see me. Yes, I can. Oh, now this is a rectal case discussion on rectal bleeding, not only a common long case, common clinical question, common viva question. This is so. Let's start talking about this. And so 50-year-old male, a PhD holder, director of government department, father of 2, 6 months history of intermittent rectal bleeding. He is taking clopidogrel and rosuvastatin in hyperemia. No second history of cardiac deaths, some smoke, occasional alcohol. This is the this is the story. So what I'm going to highlight is, once you take the history, and if you are going to present it to the examiner as a summary, you should be able to do it in 3 sentences or maximum 5 sentences, giving the gist of the clinical picture. So this patient, obviously all the essential things, his background, age, gender, briefly the main symptom and contributory and very important social stuff there. So can you can certainly switch your mics on and tell what you feel. Okay, thoughts. So type in 1 or 2. What I'm going to do. I'm opening the chat box. 2, please. So I can just go on talking on rectal bleeding and how to take the history, blah, blah, blah. But it's good if someone starts talking about what are your thoughts. Thoughts could be anything. So 54-year-old man coming with rectal bleeding, fairly good educational background. That means he understands stuff. No surgical family history, but significant medical family history. And that's it, right? So when you take a history for rectal bleeding, we are going to discuss certain things and what you should ask on and what you should analyze. So I can't see anyone who's typing. So shall I name someone? I have the luxury of seeing the list of you guys. I can in fact name someone if you like. Well, okay, you don't have any thoughts. So assess about bleeding. Okay. So assess in the sense you get amount, color, frequency, any other symptoms, and the character of bleeding. Those are the stuff that you should assess. Okay, let's move on and see what. So have something in mind. Is it a cancer? Is it something inflammatory? Is it something benign? Maybe due to clopidogrel. Yes, it is. Okay, yes. But rectal bleeding or bladder bleeding due to clopidogrel, always look for another cause, because normal rectum, normal bladder would not bleed with clopidogrel. It can bleed with brushing your teeth, but normal bladder, normal colon would not bleed with clopidogrel until proved otherwise. So you got to look for a cause. That is a very common mishap which happens. So age suggestive of a is the cause. That's true. Age suggestive of the cause. And Shehan Kumar, emptying to every and right. So stools and all increase in stool frequency, feeling of incomplete evacuation and tenuousness. So there are sinister symptoms. One thing is it's not just one or two drops on stool, or it's just a gush of blood onto the copious amount of gush of blood onto the stool. Inflammatory, whether it is infective, whether it is related to some sort of okay, those are the infective, inflammatory, or neoplastic. Some mucus is there. And recent increase in stool frequency is an important thing. So that means a change of bowel habits. So when you are presenting a change in bowel habits, you can send this patient presented with recent onset change in bowel habits. Tell what the change is when you are presenting the summary. It's increased frequency, in altered consistency, or decreased frequency, or something. Just tell. Right. So feeling of incomplete evacuation is obviously due to either inflammation of the rectum or it's due to space occupying some lesion there, because the rectal sensation is due to distension. If there is something which occupies the cavity in the rectum, at least partially, they can have feeling of incomplete evacuation. They feel as if they have more stools to pass. And the other thing is tenesmus, it's a desire to pass stools, but without successful evacuation. So that is also a symptom suggestive of either inflammation in the rectum or something space occupies. So they imagine there is a polyp or a growth or something which occupies the rectum. Time to time it swells and occupy the rectal cavity distension, and sometimes they are trapped, it distends and feel as if they want to pass, but they don't have any stool to pass. So when you are presenting your summary, please try to include at least some of these sort of information. So analysis of rectal bleeding. So there are two basic types of rectal bleeding. One thing is anal canal type of bleeding and higher bleeding. Anal canal type of bleeding is not something very sophisticated. It's bright red rectal bleeding that starts from the anal canal area. Even lower rectum to anal canal. So that is red rectal bleeding. Other thing is higher bleeding. Higher bleeding usually stagnates before it passes down, unless it's a copious amount of bleeding. So in that case, the blood changes its color. So it's very important to ask about the color of bleeding. The other thing is anal canal type of bleeding usually either drops onto stool or it streaks onto the stool. Streaky blood thing. Or in Western countries, they see blood on the tissue. We might not see because we use water, but it's like that. The higher bleeding can be mixed with stool. Their stool remains before evacuation, and if it bleeds into that and it oxidizes, it becomes altered color mixed with stool. So those are very characteristic types. So anal canal type of bleeding or even higher bleeding could be either benign or neoplastic malignant diseases, neoplastic or non-neoplastic diseases. So anything is possible, but just remember, anal canal type of bleeding could be mostly benign, but higher bleeding could be mostly malignant. So that's a clinical judgment. Because we judge on diagnosis and treatment of patients, not with multitude of symptoms, signs, impressions, and surrounding stuff. So this is one of the things that we have to think. Higher bleeding is very likely malignant. Lower bleeding could be benign. So painful, painless. Usually painful things are in the anoderm area. So usually they are benign, especially fissures. Fissure is a characteristic. Painless bleeding could be benign still, but it's a sign of malignancy. And if it is it's so painful, what type of pain? So if it's just acute pain while passing defecation, that's a classic sign of fissure. But if it is chronic pelvic pain, it could be infiltrating tumor. So therefore, it's important to ask about whether it is painful or painless. Then obviously, as we discussed, the associated changes in bowel habit. Has it gone to constipation? Has it gone to more increased frequency? Both are sinister. Constipation, usually benign, even though we feel as if it is malignant. Increased frequency could be malignant due to malignant or inflammatory disorders. There are changes, but these are not hard and fast rules. But in general, mucus discharge, as I told, there is a secretory component, inflammatory, neoplastic, or infective. Whether there is a lump associated with rectal bleeding and what kind of a lump. Is it present always? Is it reducible? Do you need to manually reduce, or does it reduce spontaneously? Or is there no lump at all? And incontinence. Is it a flatus incontinence? Is it a feces incontinence? Solid or liquid? Important to know because the sphincter complex can be involved in certain diseases which result in incontinence. So this is a bit of a roadmap to analyze. So right. So before going into the examination, do you have anything to say? Chat box, mic, video, whatever. So I'll stop for about 1 minute and see if you have anything to talk about symptom analysis. Very important. Bulk of your history of presenting complaint should be analysis of main symptom. Either one symptom or two symptoms it could be. Usually it could be bleeding from somewhere, it could be pain from somewhere, it could be dysphagia, loss of appetite, jaundice, whatever. Even in medicine, pediatrics, gynecology, always bulk of your history of presenting complaint. Please start analyzing your symptoms. Just describe the character. Fever, okay. Is it a gradual onset, sudden onset, or daily fever, once every week fever, weekly fever, fever doesn't drop, fever undulating, once in every 3 days, that sort of thing. Can we get an idea about site by mucus? Well, yes, it's usually a left colonic disease or rectal disease. Mucus discharge is usually left colonic. And if it is clear mucus, it's very likely distal sigmoid to rectum. But if it is feculent mucus, it's very likely up. So that's the only thing that I can tell you. But there are certain diseases like malignancies, polyps, diverticular disease, inflammatory bowel disease, they tend to secrete more mucus. So can't rectal carcinoma present with fresh blood mixed with? Obviously, yes. Obviously, yes. So I didn't say that these are hard and fast rules, but in general, rectal if you have seen a sample of stool or blood from a rectal cancer, it's usually old. Yes, it can acutely bleed and become fresh rectal bleeding. So any blood is fresh to start with, and it remains inside for a while, and then it passes, it changes its color. When stool mixed with blood, what level is the lesion? So obviously, these are arbitrary stuff. Unlike neurology, this reflex is for that side. This like, so example, knee jerk, it's L3 above. Plantar, yeah. So bicep C6. So in neurology, yes, there are Georgia cons, but this there is no hard and fast. When blood mixed with stool, usually above upper rectum, either rectosigmoid junction, sigmoid colon, that is the area where it mixes with blood. Could you explain a bit about spurious diarrhea? Okay, it's a change of bowel habit. Spurious diarrhea is a very, very high flown topic. What happens is if there is an obstructing lesion in usually the left colonic lesions are usually obstructing, right colonic lesions are usually polypoidal. So left colonic obstruction, the proximally get inspissated with bulky stools, and proximal to that bulky stool, there is a lot of bowel edema secretion, so that it is liquid stool. So the liquid stool will leak around the solid bits and leak through the obstruction. So that causes diarrhea sort of a disease. That's called spurious diarrhea. So then they ask about, so I hope you understood what spurious diarrhea is. So it's, so liquid stools generated proximal to an obstruction where it is bulk, it is obstructed with solid stools, and proximal to that it becomes very edematous and secretory, so it's going to be liquid. So obstruction, solid stool impacted, and here it's going to be liquid stools proximally. So they will leak around and come down as diarrhea. Do we do genetic screening for rectal cancers in Sri Lanka for HNP, hereditary non-polyposis colon cancer? Okay, in my understanding, there is no genetic screening, but we do genetic studies in selected cases. But I agree, shame to say that there are no genetic screening as such, but we targeted family screening are there. So it is, so let's discuss this academic stuff later. Let's concentrate on symptoms. Tenesmus is same as incomplete. It's not. Tenesmus is you feel as if you want to evacuate, but you cannot. Feeling of incomplete is you evacuate, but when you finish passing stools, you stand up and then you still feel, the patient still feels there's something. Okay, it means that there is some inflammation or a space occupying lesion, but it is described in different terms. Tenesmus is desire without successful evacuation. Incomplete evacuation is desire after successful evacuation. What is the difference between altered blood and melena? Okay, both are altered blood, but melena is classically from upper gastrointestinal bleeding. That means above the duodenum. Because of the digestive enzyme, heme become tarry black. It's like hair, just jet black. If you have seen melena, you will never forget. It has a characteristic smell. Melena is almost certainly liquid stools, because blood is very irritant to small bowel. It gushes through. So usually, melena is liquid, so they don't get solid melena. So they say that stools are black because they are dark brown when they are constipated, or if they take iron tablet. Melena is classic, has classic smell. It's tarry black. Like if you have seen people putting tar on the road, the liquid tar, that is melena color. It's glistening black, jet black. glistening jet black color. And it has a characteristic smell and it bleeds from upper GI tract. That means proximal to the duodenum. So altered blood it still contains some red hue. It could be maroon, brown or something, but it's not tarry black. Increased frequency suggestive of where the lesion is. Increased frequency doesn't suggest that it is where the lesion is, but it is due to irritation in the colonic, sensitive colonic areas, or secretion from mucus or either inflammatory secretions. So frequency is usually due to polyps, usually due to cancers, because they secrete, they slough food, they irritate, they send blood, it irritates the mucosa, and therefore it tends to gush out. So frequency is more important than concentration. Okay, let's move on, guys. Is there anyone who wanted to ask another one? Increased frequency. That all. So analysis of rectal bleeding. Just have an idea of the types of symptoms that can come around rectal bleeding. What is occult blood? Occult means it's not obvious. Overt means obvious. So occult means if something is there, but it is not obvious. Occult means so there is bleeding, but it is not seen. So that is called occult bleeding. Occult means there is bleeding somewhere, but it is not seen. It's not obvious. Overt bleeding is, okay, there's bleeding, you can see that. We can do some tests to find whether there is occult bleeding. In fact, they test for heme. They test for heme. So if there's heme in stools, where else it could come, either bleeding or else something ingested. So if you have ingested myoglobin muscle, yes, heme is positive. So occult blood means non-obvious bleeding or non-seen bleeding, which is detected by tests. Can we decide about the site of bleeding when patient present with streaking of stools? Streaking on stools, I believe. So if there are fresh blood streaks on stool, that is usually a sign of a fissure, symptom of a fissure, because it bleeds a bit and stool passes and it draws a line on the feces. That's a sign, symptom of a fissure. So it's an anal canal, low venous. Okay, let's stop the chat there and we have plenty of time at the end if we could finish going through the case. Right? Examination, general examination, nothing abnormally detected. Height, BMI 23. Remember in your exam, there will be a small paper in the beds on the bedside with these details. Don't ever forget these stuff because they might look for that. Abdomen soft, non-tender, no organomegaly, no feces. That's how you write in summary how it is normal. Abdominal examination was normal without any organomegaly, free fluid tenderness or any masses. That's how you say it. Don't tell no liver enlargement, no splenomegaly, no palatable kidneys. No, don't tell that. So just abdominal examination was clinically normal without any organomegaly, free fluid, or palpable masses. Something like that. General examination of this patient was normal without any pallo, or else the general examination including conjunctiva, sclera, tongue, hands, and feet were normal. Something like that. Just don't tell no pallo, no jaundice, no koilenokia, no angulus, no, don't say nose. Tell something positive. So rectal examination, no blood on finger, good donor tone, squeeze and resting, no masses. So obviously there is nothing in the rectum to be seen or felt on clinical examination. So what else we should do? We should do a proctoscopy or a rigid sigmoidoscopy on this patient to see if there is anything seen which is not palpable. Classic disease of what is seen but not palpable is hemorrhoids. Hemorrhoids are seen, not palpable. So don't tell that we did a PR examination and there are no hemorrhoids. So no, PR examination doesn't find hemorrhoids in any person. Maybe in elephants or cows or someone, but not on humans. So so hemorrhoids are seen. You got to see the hemorrhoids with the proctoscope. So you ask for that. If you don't feel anything rectally, ask for. I would like to perform a proctoscopy. Small tips, right? And any thoughts? So patient doesn't have anything on the examination. But can you say that it is normal, negative? Negative, okay, just a copy of it? No, not yet, not yet. So once you've taken the history and examination, done the examination, you've got to do a summary. And remember, the summary should contain 3 to 5 sentences. For example, in this patient, if I were to summarize, in fact, I've given you the summary. You will take a history and you should make it to the summary. 45-year-old gentleman, father of 2, or else 45-year-old gentleman, father of 2, presents with 6 months history of intermittent fresh rectal bleeding or intermittent altered rectal bleeding with mucus discharge and recent increased stool frequency. Then you can add, that is one sentence. He doesn't have any significant family history of surgical illnesses, but he has a significant cardiac history. He drinks alcohol occasionally. On examination, general examination was normal, including the conjunctiva, sclera, nails, oral cavity, and legs. Abdominal examination was clinically normal without any masses, organomegaly, or free fluid. Examination was normal without any demonstrable blood or rectal masses. How do you feel about that summary? Chat box. Have you been doing that sort of summary? So was the summary a difficult thing for you guys? Chat box. I'm waiting. Hell, good, bad, horrible, something. Oh, nice. Obviously, you go to say something good. Yeah, so I'm asking, how have you been with summaries? Difficult. Difficult thing. Writing a summary is a difficult thing. Yes, I was like you. So what I did was after taking the history as a practice thing, I started sitting down and writing the summary and cutting it off, write again, cutting it off, write again. Then you develop the skill of writing as well. Now I've been a student 13 years ago, so I should have taken more summaries than more histories than you, unless I should be starting from the first year. So now what I have, since I have exerted myself on writing down summaries myself purposefully, now it's a piece of cake to make a summary. Presentable summary with a purpose. Presentable summary with a purpose. Just not just something like a Pravrutti Saranshi, which doesn't contain anything. Even the Pravrutti doesn't contain anything, but something sensible in short sentences. Short and sweet. 5 sentences maximum. Maximum. So my trick is take your history, spend a minute, start writing down the summary. 5 sentences maximum. So you can combine your sentences, you can drop your unnecessary words, and practice makes perfect, right? Okay. So problem. So once you've done your summary, you got to make a clinical problem. So clinical problem is not a diagnosis. Clinical problem is something, a collection of symptoms or syndrome or some abnormality you saw in the clinical pattern. So this is painless altered rectal bleeding with change in bowel habits is the problem here. Clinical problem could be due to various diagnoses. So this is your problem. Okay, painless jaundice is a problem. Then fever with chills and rigors is a problem. Abnormal amenorrhea is a problem. Intermittent convulsions without temperature is a problem. Something like that. Painless progressive dysphagia is a problem. It's not a diagnosis. So problem is usually based on symptoms and signs. Probably a collection or maybe a sinister single symptom. Chronic morning headache with which increases with coughing and deviation of mouth. That is a problem. Clinical problem. So for clinical problems, you can have diagnosis. Okay. Painless jaundice, carcinoma of head of pancreas can cause painless jaundice. Carcinoma of the bile duct can cause that. Gallstone, sometimes not. Something like that. Cancer in the liver? Yes, it can. Okay. Hemolytic disease? Yes, it can. Painless jaundice, right? Okay. Didn't you think that? Right. So in this patient, altered blood, change in bowel habit, age, those are the three things to think of. Either it could be a rectal cancer. That is the first thing. Or it could be a colonic cancer, left colon. Inflammatory bowel disease, possible, but slightly late onset. Inflammatory bowel disease, usually the onset is younger than this. So usually the onset is 20s, 30s. Onset is usually good. Polyp? Yes, possible. Polyp? Yes, possible. It can bleed, it can secrete mucus, it can obstruct, tenesmus, blah, 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 anything. Diverticular disease? Possible. Uncommon in this part of the world, but common in West. Diverticular disease usually present with pain, mucus discharge, increased frequency, but it can bleed sometimes. If it bleeds, it could be intermittent type of bleeding, which is usually mixed with stools, or it can become profuse bleeding. Infective, 6 months, unlikely, but possible. Amoebiasis, tuberculosis in the colon can cause. Usually tuberculosis causes diarrheas because of chronic inflammation. And it can cause strictures, so it can cause spurious diarrheas. Also, it's chronic inflammation, secretory, it could cause diarrhea. Hemorrhoid fissure, unlikely, because it's altered blood, not an anal canal type of blood, no lumps associated, going on 6 months. Mucus discharge, change in bowel health, very unlikely. SRU is solitary rectal ulcer syndrome, possible. You don't need to learn a big or great detail on that. You don't need to read on a lot of details on solitary rectal ulcer syndrome. It's a benign ulcer in the anorectal rectosigmoid junction or the upper rectum due to various reasons. So just remember, it's a benign ulcer. Okay. There's a question, while writing the problem list, do we have to mention the probable diagnosis? For example, fever with chills and rigors, more priority to parallel? Yes, why not? So if you are trying to tell the problem list, you just tell the problem, fever with chills and rigors, altered rectal bleeding without change in bowel habits or something like that, and the period of amenorrhea. So those are the three problems that we have identified. And my differential diagnosis for the first problem, it could be pyelonephritis. Second problem, it could be a rectal polyp. Third problem, which could be pregnant, something like that. That's how you should confidently tell. Is that intestinal TB causing watery diarrhea or blood mucus diarrhea? Usually watery diarrhea, intestinal TB. But if the TB tuberculous lesion is in the left side rectum, I've seen this. It could cause bleeding. Usually it's watery diarrhea. Intestinal TB is usually watery diarrhea. That's it. So let's work on, so when you are examining or presenting the case, you should tell in these situations. It's bloody easy. Don't worry about finding it difficult. It's easy. You just need to be patient. You just need to listen to patient, organize your thoughts. Most of the time what happens is we become very panicky. Oh, well, guys, I've been through panicky exams, probably more than you after advanced levels. Okay, let's count at least 4 or 5 panicky situations if I were to panic. So exams are stressful, that's true. But if you panic, you do blunders. So just keep calm. Just keep calm. It is far easier to do an exam, ask a girl out. Okay, guys? Or the other way. So it's bloody easy. Just keep calm. Just let the time go. Just organize your thoughts. So take a history, think what's possible, analyze your symptoms, make the bulk of your history with the analysis of main symptom 1 or 2. Add the rest of the components, show that you know them, then you have a nice history. It's very easy. And do a methodical examination if they are watching, or else at least present it methodically in a palatable way. Formulate a nice summary. Start writing it down now itself. You can take a hypothetical history and start writing down the summary. If you do 5, you might not need to do it forever. You just acquire the skill. Then, then start talking. Get hold of a batchmate and do. That's how we did. That's how we did. So we got hold of our friend and we just presented them. So they act as examiners. It's far easy to present it to a consultant than to a batchmate, because the batchmates will try to screw you up. They will squeeze you dry. So it's bloody easy to present to a boss, right? Even though you don't feel like. So these are the probable differential diagnosis. Okay, if you get a rectal carcinoma, just work on these things. Okay, these are the commonest differential diagnosis. And don't ever forget that common things are common. Hemorrhoid is probably the commonest reason for rectal bleeding, and common things are common. Just mention at least at the end. Okay, this because of the sinister nature, I am telling it in this fashion, but it could be this as well. Okay, so if you tell hemorrhoids on the first differential diagnosis, painless, altered rectal bleeding, 6-month change, that doesn't seem rational, right? So, but remember, rectal bleeding, whatever the age, common things are common. Okay, you've got to learn a table, which I'm going to tell you where to find. List the causes of rectal bleeding in infants, children, young people, old people. Commonest causes for rectal bleeding in infants could be intussusception, could be rectal polyp, could be fissure, because of they can get constipated. So children, it could be polyp. It's very unlikely to be intussusception. It could be infective colitis like bacillary dysentery. It could be Meckel's diverticulum in young children. But Meckel's is uncommon in young children. Bleeding Meckel's is uncommon. Young people, it could be hemorrhoids, it could be fissure, it could be Meckel's, it could be inflammatory bowel disease. And if it is not in the childhood, polyps can appear in young age. Old age, diverticular disease, cancer, those are the two common. Hemorrhoids, Meckel's, IBD, polyps tend to occur earlier than old age. So those are the 4 areas that you got to think of in terms of common causes. Okay. Don't by heart, right? Characteristic bleeding patterns. Hemorrhoids, it's usually bright red bleeding on top of the stools, drop by drop, and sometimes it could be copious amount. Just bright red arterial color bleeding. If they don't bleed from anal cushions. Anal cushions are venous cushions, photosystemic anesthesia. Because the venous cushions become very bulky, the mucosal arterioles get scratched and they bleed. That's how. So they pass stools, then the stools rub on the mucosa and they irritate and then they bleed. So blood on stool, drop by drop, fresh, bright red. Fissure is a split in mucocutaneous junction. They bleed from arteries there. It could be veins as well, but usually they can spurt. They form streaks on stools. Fresh, painful, bright red bleed. Carcinoma rectum, we discussed, it could be mucus associated bleeding. It is usually altered in color because they just don't bleed acutely. They just bleed bit by bit, acute, and it clots and it changes color, liquefies, and then bleeds. Higher carcinoma usually mixed with stools and mucus is possible, altered in color. Carcinoma right side, there comes the occult bleeding. They just bleed bit by bit. You cannot identify it on stools. If you do an occult blood or a FIT test, fecal immunostain test for hemoglobin, FIT test we call it. Fecal immunochemistry test for blood, that is called FIT test, and that becomes positive. That is an immunological test for human hemoglobin. It is more sensitive than occult blood. Occult blood is looking for heme. Heme moiety can be there in human blood, animal blood, meat, myoglobin, anything. So right side bleeding is occult blood. The inflammatory bowel disease is usually blood and mucus diarrheas. It's chronic and relapsing. Chronic and some extra intestinal manifestations do occur. Infective diarrheas, acute blood and mucus diarrheas. Acute blood and mucus diarrheas, there's a susceptible history, abdominal pain, and the patient could be very toxic, even in IBD. Infective. Diverticular disease, usually increased stool frequency, mucus discharge, intermittent bleeding. That is altered bleeding. It can be profuse bleeding in diverticular is associated blood bleeding. It could be massive bleeding even. Okay. Rare causes like TB, solitary rectal ulcer can bleed, but usually they are not seen in the clinical practice. But remember that they can present. And also rectal trauma is another possibility. And small bowel bleeding or bleeding from upper GI tract could present as rectal bleeding. Sometimes they say in the West about 30% of rectal bleeding, profuse rectal bleeding, are from upper GI. If upper GI tract bleeds profusely, bright red blood can appear in the rectum, and the Meckel diverticulum can bleed freshly from the rectum. That means copious amount of blood from the upper GI tract. But don't ever mention those stuff in this long-term bleeding and all. But if you are asked and if you are writing an essay, the uncommon causes or the major causes of the colon and rectum origin and the other causes, you can write it. And bleeding dyscrasis, usually they don't bleed from the rectum unless there is a potential cause like a fissure or a hemorrhoid. But you know, ITP and things, they don't present like rectal bleeding. Hemophilias, they don't present with rectal bleeding. Don't ask me why, that's how they are. So hemorrhoids, classic bleeding, we discussed. So they rub onto the stool spas, dilated cushions, mucosal arterioles just breach, and they bleed fresh arteries. This is a common question because they are not bleeding from the inner cushions, right? Back to the case. What's next? So we have 20 minutes more to discuss this case, right? What's next? So I'm going to tell you, there is, okay, if you want to manage, okay, there's a chat box. What is the commonest cause of recurrent ER bleeding in adolescents? It's hemorrhoids. Hemorrhoids. Because of straining. Hemorrhoids. And trichiura is for rectal prolapse, right? Don't ever think that it bleeds. People tell that, okay? By the way, it's a common cause of tenesmus. Trichiura infection. It's common cause of tenesmus in young. So what is the commonest cause of recurrent ER bleeding in adolescents? It's hemorrhoids. Okay, principles of managing any illness. You got to come to a diagnosis. Diagnosis should be a gross anatomical diagnosis. Okay, this organ has a heart is disease, brain is disease, something like that. Esophageal problem, stomach, testicle, ovary, uterus, something like that. So the gross anatomically, you should come to a conclusion of diagnosis. So the carcinoma of esophagus. And microscopically, you should have a diagnosis. Is it a carcinoma, adenocarcinoma? Is it a carcinoma, sarcoma, lymphoma, something like that? So achieve your diagnosis. Gross anatomically, you do upper gastric endoscopy, you do a CT, something, and find out a gross anatomical diagnosis. You do a biopsy and find the histological diagnosis. So diagnosis. Any disease, you stage. Any disease, you stage. Dengue, okay, leaking stage, non-leaking stage, simple stage. COVID, so COVID infection, COVID pneumonia, COVID ARDS, something like that. So hypertension, mild disease, moderate disease, severe disease, MI, non-ST elevation, unstable angina, non-ST elevation, ST elevation, minimal cardiac necrosis, something. You stage the disease. You stage the disease in terms of local complications or local spread, especially in cancer. You stage the disease in terms of distant problems. For example, dengue hemorrhagic fever with dengue shock syndrome. So dengue hemorrhagic fever, something like that, staging. Systemic hypertension, severe hypertension with intracerebral bleed. So something like that. Then to treat the patient, assessment of patient's fitness for any form of therapy. There are some people who are not fit for even a haircut. And there are some people who don't even need a treatment, even though they have a sinister disease, they are that fit. So assess the patient. There are 4 organ stresses: heart, lung, liver, kidney, and brain. 5 organ stresses. You can assess those organs, whether they are functioning properly. That's how you identify physiological reserve. Up to this level, diagnosis, staging, and patient assessment. For fitness for therapy, you use history, you use examination, you use investigation. Diagnose clinically, gross anatomically, and sometimes even you can predict the history. And then you examine and find out that gross anatomical diagnosis. And then you do an investigation like endoscopy and find a biopsy. Get a biopsy and find it. Stage it clinically. Okay, if the patient has back pain, the esophageal carcinoma has spread. If the patient has pelvic pain with a rectal, okay, it's very likely that it has spread to the nerves. If they have sacral pain, has they gone into the sacrum? If they have hematuria, if they have fecal uria, has they invaded to the bladder? If they have impotence, have they invaded to the nerve irrigantes? Something like that. So clinical assessment of staging. If they have cough, has it gone to the lungs? If they have jaundice, okay, has it gone to the liver, rectal cancer? Something like that. And local and distant spread can be clinically assessed. History examination, you feel the liver, you feel the nodule liver, okay, is it liver deposits? You feel a lump here, okay, left side at supraclavicular area, okay, is it a Werkow's node? So distant spread. And you do some investigation. Usually they are imaging. Sometimes they are biochemical, right? So do a CT, do an MRI, do an X-ray, do a barium study, something. Various diseases have various sort of investigations which are useful. So do some investigation to investigate. Patient assessment, history. How long can you walk? Can you climb a tire of stairs? Can you run? Can you hop? Can you jump? Can you swim? Something like that. Examine pulse, blood pressure, heart rate, apex beat, cardiomegaly, jugular venous pulse, carotid bruise, blah, blah, blah. Stage, assess the patient's situation. Okay, basal Krebs, edema, patient is in heart failure. All right, so he's not going to survive anything major. So you can tailor-make your investigation, whether you are going to do something, not to do something, if you are going to do, what sort of stress that we are going to create. And then you do some imaging. For example, in heart, you start with an ECG, then with a thallium scan of the heart or an angiogram. So you have a hierarchy, an array of investigation classes of the heart. You start with simple listening of the lungs and go to ventilation and perfusion scans. So various steps. Listen, do a chest X-ray, do a peak flowmetry, do a spirometry, do a CT pulmonary angiogram, contrast enhanced CT to identify the lung situation, then do a blood gas, then do a ventilation perfusion scan, something like that. So it's very easy to arrange investigations. In fact, when I was a student, I had the great trouble of arranging investigations. I didn't know how to investigate people, and people are writing blah, 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 blah. I didn't know how they write. Then found this principle and it's become bloody easy. Do you feel so? Do you feel arranging relevant investigations to a patient? Is it difficult or easy? I was in trouble. I couldn't do that properly. When I was a 4th year, I can still remember I was asking the HO, Akka, how am I going to investigate? Malli, hame kenadama full butt count ekak karanawane. Is it no. Then I learned it the hard way that if you stick to this sort of principles, you can plan ahead. So you start with history, examine, investigate. Why am I investigating? For this purpose. Okay, this is it. Then it became crystal clear and very easy. Somebody is asking something. It is difficult. Yes, it is. It was difficult. And now you should find it easier. If you just break it down to this, just sit and think, okay, do I need to do anything to diagnose this? Okay, this is that test. Do I need to do any test to Stage this up. Okay, these are those. That's how you do it. Okay. Dengue. Do I need to do any test to diagnose? Okay, full blood count. I need to know the white cell count, platelet. And okay, stage. Do I need a full blood? Oh, yes. PCV is important. White cell count is important. Ultrasound, yes, it is important. It just becomes a piece of cake. NS1, okay, diagnosis, yes. Is there any dengue antibody that we have? Okay, I don't know what it is. Do I need to do a blood picture to identify dengue? No, dengue is not diagnosed. Something like that. Okay, just don't do freedom electrolyte, bacteria, creating 5 things, blah 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 to anyone. No, you might end up doing everything to everybody, but start thinking, why am I doing? Why am I doing? Then it becomes your system, and it becomes so easy and crystal clear. It's not difficult, even though it was difficult for me back in 2007, 6, 7. I was in trouble. Then we found these 5 principles, and it's very easy. And then optimize the patient. That means you try to rebuild patients' physiological reserve. It could be nutrition, it could be cardiac rehabilitation, pulmonary rehabilitation, psychological rehabilitation, renal functions optimization, blood optimization, anything. Anything. Exercise tolerance, you do physiotherapy preoperatively, you do spirometry preoperatively, you treat lung diseases, you give inhale. That's how you optimize. Okay. And the patient has angina, you medication, give prognostic medication, give aspirin, give aspirin, control blood pressure, control heart failure, give nitrates, control the cardiac. Patient is edematous, dialyze them, diuretics, something. So you optimize. Then you have management, guys. It's very easy to manage people now. And then think of what's the, are you going to chop this off? Are you going to leave it? Are you going to partially do something? Are we going to just symptom control? Are we going to do not do anything? Therapy. Are we going to operate it? Are you going to manage with antibiotics? Some medical drugs, some wonderful name, drug name, some fancy medication that the oncologist and psychiatrist survive on, neurologist survive on, fancy name, tenecteplase, something like that. Guys, I am very animated. This is my natural behavior, right? If we could meet face to face in the lecture hall, I might dance and do certain acts. This is my natural behavior. I can't stop them, right? I might look like a coloradda, but it is the same. All right. And it's me. Okay. Did you understand this 5 principles of managing a disease? So if you stick to these principles and work on clinical to investigation serially, you'll have an array of things to do and you'll be clear. We like it. So it could be more interesting if you could meet face to F. Right, diagnostic investigations for this purpose. Back to case, guys. So gold standard is colonoscopy, and you got to. I'm not going to go into the details of this stuff. If you tell the colonoscopy, the examiner, if I was the examiner, I will not ask how to do colonoscopy from you guys, but I will ask about how to prepare for a colonoscopy. Are you going to keep the patient fasting? How long are you going to keep the patient fasting? How are you going to prepare the bowel? You got to know the preparation solution which is using both, which is polyethylene glycol. And yes, it's fair to ask the regime. How much would you give? And how would you troubleshoot if the patient starts vomiting? What you do? If the patient seems to be obstructed, what would you do? If the patient doesn't like the taste, what would you do? And is it enough to give it partially, rather than giving 4 sachets? So those sort of questions. So we are not going to discuss them today. And then you got to learn about procedure because it's done usually under sedation, and it's an invasive procedure. And what are the risks? And what would you do after the patient has had the? Are you going to just send the patient home? Are you going to observe? Do you give oxygen? Do you need to have certain drugs at your disposal? And what are the risks? How frequent perforate. Usually 1 in 500 they can perforate. 1 in 500 if it is a diagnostic. How to send biopsies? Punch biopsies, you take the biopsy forceps, and when in what would you send them? 10% formal saline. And the other thing is, are you going to stop anticoagulation? Those are the questions that you've got to look for. So usually diagnostic colonoscopy, you don't need to stop any sort of anticoagulation, like even warfarin, clopidogrel. But if you are planning on doing anything other than a biopsy, you got to work on anticoagulation management. Preparation, usually patient keep fasting for 6 hours, but they can have something light to eat the previous meal. And it is usually patients are prepared with 4 liters of polyethylene glycol to be drunken in within 1 hour with 2 hours rest of with adequate hydration. And that is the usual standard preparation. There have been other preparations, but not standard anymore. But it is usually polyethylene glycol preparations which are standard now. There have been some certain other things which I'm not going to tell because they are currently, very recently, they have become out of practice unless specifically indicated. Our procedure is done under sedation. It's an invasive test. Colonoscopy is 160 centimeters long, and it involves gas distension, inspection, taking photographs, and we can examine up to the terminal ileum if it is a complete colonoscopy of gold standard. Gold standard completion is up to the ileum. And risks, I told you, the patients usually feel bloated and they might feel as if they want to pass stools. And risk you got to know is if it is a diagnostic 1 in 500 chance of perforation. And if it is a procedure like stenting, it's even higher, right? So then there's a chat. Someone is asking more about Clean Prep and Clean Enema. Clean Prep is a trade name. It's polyethylene glycol balanced electrolyte solution. It's a bowel cleanser. Clean Prep or polyethylene glycol solutions do not alter electrolyte do not cause electrolyte imbalance because it contains electrolyte in a normal physiological concentration when it is given in a proper formula. Like if you want to dilute it in 1 liter, you should dilute it in 1 liter. You shouldn't do it in 2 liters. So in that case, it drags more electrolytes out. So if you dilute it in 1 liter, yes, you can taste it with certain additives like a cordial or something if it is not palatable, but not much. So don't add Clean Prep to cordial, but add cordial to Clean Prep. That's how I tell. And the Clean Prep is a polyethylene glycol solution with balanced electrolytes. So it's a bowel cleanser. It doesn't alter serum electrolytes. So you don't need to IV hydrate unless the patient is already dehydrated. In that case, you are not going to prepare the bowel like that. But it's a good habit to encourage the patient to have plenty of liquids. Clean enema is a phosphate enema. It contains phosphate. It's a stimulant. Purgative, in fact, it's not really a laxative. Laxatives are taken from mouth. Purgatives are from behind. So it contains sodium bisphosphate, biphosphate. It irritates rectal mucosa and it goes down. So you you give the enema per rectally. Ask the patient when the enema is usually 250 milliliters. The clean enema and micro enema is very small. Clean enema. About 200 milliliter, 150 to 200 milliliter, you inject it, you instill it in the rectum, and the rectum distends, and the patient feels the urge. Instruct, you will feel the urge, but try to hold it for 15 minutes. Then the enema goes up to the left colon, and you can virtually empty all the left colon. And in fact, one of my relatives even had a colonoscopy just by an enema. What happens is PEG is given only the half doses too. Kaushika knows what I tell to those things because we worked together and we had plenty of patients. Isn't that Kaushika? Are you around? All right. Seems that the Kaushika has gone. Like guys,
no, I'm here.
Can you remember that what we tell them, guys? If you can imagine ever that you put your head into Paripuhattiya, that's how it looked like in partially bowel prepared, like Paripuhattiya Oludenva. It's very bad, hopeless bowel prepared. It's easy to work with solid stool, but it's very difficult to
work with liquid stools, right? Either you prepare or not prepare. Once I had a wonderful problem. So those days we used to prepare bowel. I think Kaushik can remember this. Those days we used to prepare bowel for left colonic resections, like anterior resections, and one of our good HOs forgot to prepare the bowel. And he gave 2 clean prep instead, and we ended up in a mess because it's liquid stool from the surgical field. So don't ever prepare bowel partially. Either you prepare or not prepare, right?
Yeah,
It's good to postpone the colonoscopy rather than doing a suboptimal job, which is very risky. And don't ever tell that you are going to mechanically bowel prepare for left colonic surgery nowadays. It's out of practice, guys. It's out of practice. Do not give clean prep for patients who are going to get left colonic surgery. People can fail now. People can fail now. Enema, yes, possible, but not mechanical. What happens if PEG given only half the dose? Okay, diagnostic workup. So other tests and values, flexible fiber optic sigmoidoscopy. This is a standard abbreviation used in Western world, FOS, fiber optic sigmoidoscopy. We usually call it FlexiSig, flexible sigmoidoscopy. It's only 60 centimeters. You can only see the left colon. It covers about 70% of malignancy area, but it is good only for young people presenting with bright rectal bleeding to see if there is proctitis. And if you want to just do a quick test, like or is a therapeutic test in volvulus. CT colonogram, very high yielding diagnostic ability. It is done in old frail people or people who do not consent to colonoscopy. Polyp detection rate is equivalent 95% sensitive. But the disadvantage is you can't have a biopsy with CT colonogram. You have to have a special protocol, bowel prepare, CT pneumocolon. Sometimes they say they put gas to have contrast inside, contrast and rectal contrast and gas, and they do it. Barium enemas out of practice, but when we were students and junior doctors, we used to request patients for barium enemas. They have classic patterns, apple co-appearance, blah, 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 and probably not done commonly nowadays unless it's desperately indicated. FIT is fecal immunohistochemical test. That is a screening tool. Current standard screening tool for bowel cancer is FIT test. It's done in UK, Scotland, and in some of the Western world, but not, unfortunately, not in Sri Lanka. But some fortunately, we are fortunate that bowel carcinoma is kind of less common in our country. Whether we are missing, we don't know. For this fecal occult blood, you need to prepare the patient for occult blood test for refraining for heme containing stuff for about 3 days and avoid certain metal containing medications like iron and all, and then gets fecal samples. They test for heme moiety. So if anything which contains iron or heme or similar substances, they can have false positives. CECT is gateway. It's only about 60% sensitive in detecting colonic masses, but it is a test for gold standard test for suspected diverticular disease. So you got to learn about these bit of stories of these tests and at least the names and when to use it and when not to use it. For example, if you can't do a colonoscopy, do a CT colon, at least do a flexible sigmoidoscopy or a CECT. Don't tell. All right, guys, if the patient has rectal bleeding or melena, don't do fecal occult blood, because occult blood is done when you can't see bleeding. I have seen people requesting fecal occult blood for people with melena, right? Okay, they do surgical. So we have done a patient presented with melena. Well, people have told me, sir, there is a patient with melena. We did a occult blood, which is positive. Oh, very good. Yes, it should be possible, right? Okay, don't ever do those silly things, right? Okay, this is an important diagram. Distribution of carcinomas in colon. This is just so just you can have a snapshot of this. I can make this presentation available. This is freely available. I will send it to Kaushik and department. So about 30% of cancers are seen in anorectum, about another 30 seen in sigmoid colon, and about 10% seen in the left colon. So if we examine this bit, we can cover about 70 to 75% chance of detecting, there is the chance of detecting a cancer if it is available, if it is there, is about 70. So 70% of cancers occur in left colon and majority in the colon, sigmoid colon and rectum, this area. So it's very important to, and the next common site is cecum. Next common site is cecum. They usually present with anemia. So guys, if the patient has iron deficiency anemia, think of cecal tumor. And ascending colons 10%, transverse colon 10%, and these flexures can involve 2% each. 2% each. So remember this diagram. If you are asked on an essay or a discussion, what to do, what not to do, so it's good information to take. Staging strategies. So staging, local staging and distant staging in rectal carcinomas. So they call it triple assessment: colonoscopy, MRI pelvis, and CT chest abdomen. Those are the three standard, but unfortunately we do not do MRIs that many, we go by the CT. I'm not going to go into that much of details. MRI is to identify local spread. There are, if we are discussing for the MD part 2, this is a separate, very interesting topic, what to look for, what not to look for, what are the people, what is, okay, I'm not going to tell anything of those, but just remember there are a lot of information around staging. Just remember that you do local staging and distant staging. And the best investigations are MRI pelvis, CT abdomen, chest abdomen pelvis, and a colonoscopy. Those are the three classic tests. But remember that MRI is not freely available in Sri Lanka. So we go by CT. So in your exam, you got to tell you, then colonoscopy, yes, obviously. Then you got to tell CT, chest, abdomen, and pelvis. And if they ask, is that all? Yes, sir, I know that I'm aware that MRI pelvis is currently the standard, but I haven't seen it being done. It is not available freely in our country. 100 marks. If I was here, 100 marks. And you do CEA, carcinoembryonic antigen staging strategy, not for any staging, not for any diagnostic purpose, but for follow-up. Just remember that. There are causes for elevated CEA. There are tumors which can cause high CEA. There are tumors which do not cause CEA. And there are various theories and various information that we can discuss in and around CEA, especially with postgraduates, not with you guys, right? Just remember that you do something called CEA. Your duty is to send a CEA for any patient with rectal cancer in next 2-3 years, right? When you are HO, SHO, that's what we, that's it. What about endorectal ultrasound? You are going to go to the deep waters. Yes, endorectal ultrasound is important if you are planning on transanal resection to see if the lesion is T1 or T2 or T3. That is out of that is bit advanced. Yes, it is done if you are planning on endoanal resection. We are going to come to that other strategies later. Okay, endorectal ultrasound is not routine. If you obviously do not have facility to do endoanal ultrasound, endoanal resection like TAMIS, you call it transanal minimally invasive surgery to remove. These are fine details. You don't need to stress on these stuff. These are probably more than nice things to do. No, even you might get one MCQ from that, but it's not a gist of the case, right? Endorectal ultrasound, I'm not going to say that is an unimportant question, but it's done to do a local staging, T1 versus T2, T2 versus T3, and it is done when the plan is there for endoanal excisions. And staging strategy is this. So then our next two topics for this patient, assessment and optimization. And therapy, magic word when you discuss treatment or management is multidisciplinary approach. Just don't tell it as for the sake of saying. You should know who the multidisciplinary team is. In this case, a radiologist comes, pathologist comes, oncologist comes, radiation oncologist comes, surgeons come, and they discuss the best option for the patient, whether we are going to do this or that or this or that. And treatment could be curative or palliative, it could be medical therapy or surgical therapy, it could be primary therapy or adjuvant therapy. Primary therapy is the main treatment strategy for a illness. The bulk of the disease is cleared with the primary therapy. For example, Cancer, the primary therapy is usually surgery. There are certain exceptions. Primary therapy is, for example, oral cancers, pharyngeal cancers. Now the primary therapy is radiotherapy. Anal cancers. Now the primary therapy is chemoradiotherapy. Colonic cancers, primary therapy is surgery. Early breast cancers, primary therapy is surgery. Thyroid, primary therapy is surgery. Okay, so primary therapy. Adjuvant therapy is supportive. Once the bulk of the disease is cleared with whatever the primary treatment is supporting. Advanced breast cancer, primary therapy is systemic therapy. Then you clear all the systemic disease, try to control, and then remove the primary breast tumor, which is not the primary. This is adjuvant surgery, or we call it toilet mastectomy. Okay? Not that we do it in the toilet. And adjuvant therapy, supportive therapy, could be before the primary therapy or after the primary. So then called neoadjuvant when you do it before, adjuvant when you do it after. That is called upfront or preoperative. That is called neoadjuvant. So if you combine primary therapy with neoadjuvant and adjuvant, you call it sandwich. Pampettai, honda tikai. Surgery, adjuvant, neoadjuvant, adjuvant. So that is sandwich. Okay. Those are the little terms that you might hear. Don't ever go until I'm going to plan for sandwich surgery. No. How the question comes? What are the options here? What are the options that you know? Yes, the primary therapy for this patient would be surgery. But I'm aware that this could be helped with other therapy like systemic chemotherapy. It could be in adjuvant setting or a neoadjuvant. Oh, that carries marks. Okay. And if a person has a disease which is inoperable, and if you can give some treatment systemically and convert it to an operable disease, that's called conversion therapy. Just remember these terms. You will hear these terms. When I was a medical student, these were not there. Okay, some of these terms are not there. I had the luxury of not learning those stuff, but you guys are in the second decade of 21st century, and you don't have that luxury of being the first decade of 20th century. Okay. In rectal carcinoma management, neoadjuvant therapy has a place in certain stages. So what tumor to be given neoadjuvant and what not to be given neoadjuvant, which neoadjuvant therapy is out of the question from you guys. It's for the postgraduates, right? So the rectal carcinoma neoadjuvant treatment improves resectability. It reduces local recurrence. There is a question of survival advantage. Up to now, researchers have not proven that there is a survival advantage, but there are some studies coming up, new ones. They claim that they have their own group cohorts of people, they have survival advantage. And what to give is an NDT decision. Options are radiotherapy, chemoradiotherapy. Okay, and sometimes biological therapy, but usually radiotherapy or chemoradiotherapy. There are various regimes. Usually, one is long course chemoradiotherapy. Just remember that. Finish. Okay. How to prepare this patient for surgery? Left side versus right side bowel preparation. Right side, no bowel preparation. Left side, just an enema would do in the day of operation, or else the night and the day, the night before and the day of the operation. Usually, day of the left side, just to reduce the bulk of the feces. Usually now we do laparoscopic operations, so it's easy to handle bowel with empty colons. But right side, we do not give mechanical bowel. That means right side, we do not entertain giving patients polyethylene glycol or treatment. It's out of the question. We don't even mention it now. For left side, remember enemas, and right side, usually nothing. Open versus laparoscopic, yes. Both are still performed. Laparoscopic is the current standard, but bad laparoscopic surgery or not doing surgery because of no laparoscope is worse than not doing an open surgery. So even the laparoscope is not available, just treat it with open operation. Because open operation, hundreds and hundreds years of old, survived, and people have survived after open operation. At least do something. And there are endoscopic procedures. For example, for polyps, they can do polypectomies, mucosal, endoscopic mucosal resection. They inject saline, elevate the lesion, suck it out, and cut it out. And then the other one is TAMIS, transanal minimally invasive surgery. TAMIS, TAMIS. And how to prepare these people for surgery? How many hours would you fast the people? What type of tubes that you are going to send to with the patient? How to consent these people? Just have a read on them. And aftercare. What are the critical problems on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7 that you are going to anticipate? How to recognize and how to manage, especially when to suspect leaks, when to suspect other infections, when to suspect other sepsis, when to suspect, how to rule out the causes for fevers after operation, how to rule out causes for hypoxia, confusion, pain, and all sorts of things. So aftercare includes pain management, chest care, limb physiotherapy, DVT prophylaxis, continuous observation for fluids and electrolytes, nutritional assessment, clinical assessment for complication like bleeding, anastomosis leak, sepsis, all that. Okay, so aftercare is that. So that's a separate topic. Post-operative care is a separate topic. It's worthwhile discussing. That's fine. Types of operations for colorectal cancer: well and truly long-standing anterior resection. And no posterior resections, guys. Somebody answered me like that when I was an SR in Peradeni. So no posterior resections. Anterior resection. I can explain why it was called anterior resection, but it's not the time for now. Abdominoperineal resection. So there are two operations. One is from abdomen, one's from perineum, and now they do what is called extra levator abdominoperineal excision of the rectum, ELAP. So that's an oncologically divides new surgical strategy called ELAP. The excision margin is wider than conventional and abdominoperineal resection, but it needs complex reconstruction of the perineum. But just have heard of this. These are now standard ones. APR, abdominoperineal resection, is not the standard now. ELAP is the standard for very low rectal tumors, which cannot be removed only from abdomen. Okay, and then the array of colectomies, which I'm going to show you next time. And adjuvant therapy, chemo, radio, and molecular targeted. Remember molecular targeted. Okay, there is a thing called molecular targeted therapy. There are specific cell receptors which are targeted by specific medication, and they alter the tumor biological behavior in terms of improving survival. Example is epidermal growth factor receptor, EGFR. Okay, and there are vascular endothelial growth factor receptor called PEGFR, and there are HER2 receptors, human epidermal growth factor receptor 2, HER2 receptors, and various medications that they give. In rectal colon and rectal carcinoma, the medication which they are talking about is cetuximab. And when to give, when not to give, which mutations, KRAS, wild type, those are posted questions. Okay, I'm not going to strain you on that. Okay, so the yellow things are, the yellow part is the one which is removed. So right hemicolectomy, left hemicolectomy. Just know, you don't need to know how to do a right hemicolectomy, but remove that. Just know that the right hemicolectomy, this bit is removed, and the rest is joined. So left hemicolectomy, this bit is removed, and the rest is joined. Then the subtotal colectomy up to the rectosigmoid junction, maybe the distal sigmoid, it is removed. And pan-procto, pan is sial, everything. Pan-procto is the rectum, pan-passa, procto-passa. Pan-proctocolectomy is remove colon and rectum, including the anus. Pan-procto. And the anterior resection is when you remove distal sigmoid and part of rectum and you anastomose left colon to the anastomose colon to the rectum. That is anterior resection. You should have an anastomosis, and part of the rectum and the distal, at least distal sigmoid, should be removed. Part of the rectum and part of the left colon is removed, and the remainder of the colon is anastomosed to the remainder of the rectum, we call it rectal stump. That is anterior resection. Anterior resection could be high anterior resection when you anastomose to the upper rectum or the middle rectum, And it could be low anterior resection when you anastomose it to the virtually to the anus or the lower rectum or the anus. Coloanal anastomosis, colorectal lobe anastomosis. There are various ways of determining which type of anastomosis, how long was it away. That's out of the question. So abdominoperineal resection, it's the removal of the part of the left colon, rectum, and anus. So if you remove this bit with the levator ani, then you call it ELAC. This is done to do what is called total mesorectal excision to improve oncological outcome. You might find these details are too much, but these are the terms that you are going to hear in future. Okay, just have them heard. You don't need to talk about how to do TME and what is the advantage of doing TME. What if it is not so? What is the recurrence rate? Blah 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 blah. You don't need to know. Just remember there is a thing called total mesorectal excision. Metastatic disease, whether it is single organ disease or multi-organ disease, now they are curative. Even lung, they ablate, liver, they resect, ablate, do arterial chemoembolization and do something. It's not the death sentence. Multi-organ disease, even lung and liver, both they can manage. Bone, they give radiotherapy, they do enucleation. Brain, they enucleate and try to manage this metastatic cancer disease as a chronic disease. Best possible care for palliation. If you can't do anything, palliate the pain, palliate the obstruction, palliate the bleeding. That means do something to avoid, prevent pain or treat pain. Do something to prevent obstruction. Do something for bleeding. Do something psychologically. Give some nutrition. So try to make the life easy till the patient dies from that illness. Somebody is asking a question. Is there any place to Hartmann procedure? Yes, in emergency situations and in desperate situations. Hartmann's procedure is excision of excision of left colon or rectosigmoid junction with closed rectal stump and end colostrum. Yes, there is Hartmann. There is an option, but usually in emergency setting and in desperate situations. But it could be curative as well. So that could be the final operation in some people, many people. They say about 30% people, they do not come for reversal. They just are happy with whatever they have. And remember that anterior sections are done with covering ileostomies sometimes. Covering ileostomies, because that means the intention is to reverse them. Intention is to reverse them. Especially people who have had preoperative radiotherapy, they almost certainly get an ileostomy temporarily. Modern understanding of cancer management is to consider it as a chronic disease rather than a death sentence. So they live with cancers. Once I've met a patient who came with a strangulated hernia for a laparotomy when I was in England, and he had 3 cancers being treated: lung, prostate, and something else, and lymphoma. The gentleman, doctor, I had 3 cancers and had 3 pneumonectomies, prostate, radiotherapy, and chemotherapy for lymphoma, and coming with strangulated inguinal hernia in his late 60s, and had a laparotomy and went home. And then people live with cancers, and sometimes they live with metastatic disease as well. Can we repeat when should not do mechanical bowel? Right colonic surgeries, we do not do mechanical bowel preparation. Left colonic surgeries, we do not do mechanical. So colorectal surgery, no more polyethylene glycol. Common question is whether you give it to the left side. No, you prepare your bowel with anyone. Right colonic surgery, you do not do anything. Clean prep is not given in people who are intolerant to that or who are obstructed. Those are the only things that I know when not to give mechanical bowel preparation and when not needed. Okay. And mechanical bowel preparations are given for colonoscopies and sometimes for CT colonogram. And yeah, those are the 2 things. And some surgeons still prefer to do mechanical bowel preparation for laparoscopic surgery. Some, but it's not a standard practice. If they ask you, you can tell them. In our, what I have seen in our ward is they do not give, we do not give, but I am aware that there are some units they prefer, especially when laparoscopic surgeries are done. That's how you answer. You wouldn't be pushed into such sticky situations in this exam, guys. Right, discussion, MCQ. Anything? Okay, let's see the time. It's 9:28. So we have half an hour, 40 minutes more to discuss 5 MCQs. That's enough, I think. And let's have about 5 minutes. I usually have the habit of detaining the students after the given time as well. And this hour is not unusual for me. I used to do classes when I was the registrar in Kandy from 8 p.m. to about 10:30 p.m. And those students, I'm very happy, are now SRs. Some of them are SRs, some of them are registrars. Okay, anything that you want? I was rushing in the latter part. Yes, I don't have any other option. I can't because it's a hell of a lot of information, and I have cut down considerable amount, but I had to stop fast. And you might find that slightly difficult to follow, but that's how it is. But it's not difficult. Can neoadjuvant chemotherapy reduce metastatic disease? Can neoadjuvant affect anastomostic complications? Neoadjuvant chemotherapy or radiotherapy, can they reduce metastatic disease? No, they can reduce local recurrence. Can neoadjuvant chemotherapy affect anastomostic complications? Yes. In rectal surgery, neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy can cause more than 25% anastomosis. Therefore, it is advised to do when covering ileostomy for a low anti-rejection. Because anastomotic leak rate in colonic anastomosis is roughly around 5%. Colon rectum low anastomosis around 10%. But if the patient had neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy, chances of leaking becomes about 25. 1 in 4 will leak. So it's going to be dead. He is going to be dead if they really leak. So then, yes, neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy. It's not just chemotherapy, chemoradiotherapy. It can affect anastomosis adversely, increase leak rate. Metastatic disease, it is not proven that it does not prevent, but it prevents local recurrence. Yes. Okay, neoadjuvant chemotherapy, if it is not done for upper rectal tumors, recurrence rate is about 12%, 12 to 15%, and if it is given, it's half that. Please, can you repeat Hartmann's procedure? Hartmann's procedure is removal of colon and a bit of and a part of rectum, maybe. Okay, right, just forget. Removal of part of colon with closing of rectal stump and bringing out an end colostrum. Remove a part of colon, close the distal stump, bring out the proximal stump as a stone. Remove a part of colon, close the distal stump, bring out the proximal stump as a stone. That is Hartmann's procedure. And if you are going to leave a long distal stump, you can't leave that long stump closed because the colon is active tissue. It secretes, it can blow up. So that the remainder in the distal part should be short. How should they ask operative surgery? So if we are going to remove, then now I'm predicting the next question. And if the remainder is long, what are you going to do? Okay, double barrel stoma. I'm predicting the next question. Okay, Hartmann's procedure is removing a part of left colon, closure of distal stump, bring out the proximal stump as a stoma. I feel as if I should run now. Any more? Good questions. Ask anything. Is there someone who's typing? No. Okay. So why mechanical preparation not entertained now? Okay. They have proven that it increases surgical wound infection. Mechanical bowel preparation increases surgical wound infection by 1, and it increases postoperative ileus, that is 2, and it increases fluid electrolyte imbalance. Even though these are balanced preparations, it increases fluid electrolyte and it generates more stress to the patient. So those are important in post-operative outcome. We call it enhanced recovery or the fast track pathway. We just push the patient for recovery. We just don't let them fasting. Just we don't do tender loving care or blah blah blah. So it delays. They have shown that mechanical bowel preparation delays recovery. So it disturbs electrolyte imbalance, it increases ileus, it increases surgical wound infection, and it disturbs early recovery. So therefore, you don't do it. Why defunctioning colostomy done after heart procedure is a reversible? Yes, the issue is Hartmann's procedure is a salvage emergency procedure. You can't spend a lot of time joining, and the patient is not stable to do that, or it is not practically possible. So it's not a defunctioning colostomy. Just you chop it off in quick emergency. You just remove the disease, clamp the distal end, just bring out the stoma, close and come out, and recover, and then we can go in and rejoin the patient. Why it is not done? Because it is not possible in that situation. Either the patient's disease condition or yes, especially the disease condition precludes joining. Either it's an emergency procedure or practically impossible. So it's rather have a live patient with a stoma or dead patient with an anastomy. Which one would you prefer? So that's how we decide. So we'd like to have a live patient with a stoma rather than a dead patient with an anastomy. That's simple in simple terms. It's not really a defunctioning colostomy. It's just a colostomy, end colostomy. Don't ever tell that it's a defunction. To defunction, you should have functioning continuity of bowel should be there. And you bring out a proximal stoma, then you call it defunction. So defunctioning ileostomies, colostomies are done when the continuity is there, but you just remove the function from it. But in Hartmann's, you remove a bit, suture the distal end, bring out the stoma. There is no continuity. It's just an end stoma, but it is temporary. Intention is temporary. 30% of people just remain so. They just don't want to revert. They just say they are happy with that. So they just remain so. But yes, it is reversible. We should attempt reversal. How to reverse? Different question. How to prepare? Some other day. Maybe. Okay, guys, let's move on to MCQs. I made how to identify the loop ileostomy. Loop ileostomy is usually sited on the right ileal fossa and it has 2 holes. Loop ileostomy has 2 holes, one short, one long. One short, one long. So here hole, here hole. And the fecal content is usually greenish and more liquid in ileostomy. It has 2 holes. And the ileostomies are sprouted. Colostomies are flat. Colostomies are flat, ileostomies are sprouted. Usually ileostomies are on RIF, but there are situations where we have to cite ileostomies somewhere else. Okay, let's move on to questions. Okay, don't blame me if I keep you long, okay? Right. Okay, these questions are best answer type. I formulated 5 questions. These you might find this so tricky and can't answer. All the answers are correct. Yes, I purposefully did it for discussion purpose, and they have more than 5 answers. These would not appear in the exam as they are, but the concepts are very common to appear. Yes, the questions are longer. This is how they appear in the exam, but it's not difficult. Just read quickly and grab the key information and formulate the answer. Okay. 25-year-old multiparous female. It's very important. 25 multiparous female. History of migraines. Okay. What the hell that you are talking about the other end, but talking about migraines. Just remember, Was a fresh rectal bleeding with defecation since 3 days associated with heart stools, and it was painful. On examination, there was a breach in mucocutaneous junction of the anus at 12 o'clock position, common sight in females for fissures. Best management option. So this is an anal acute fissure in anal, 3 days, painful, fresh rectal bleeding, constipation, female multiparous migraine. Best option. I'll give you 30 seconds to answer, then we'll discuss. All these answers are correct, huh? At least partially correct. You might find it partially correct. Okay, what is the best option? This is how the question is. Best option. I have given 8 responses. I know you get 25. And when you do postgraduate, there are a variety of questions for EMQs, extended matching. There you get about 15 choices and you got to find one. They say, somebody says A. Well, let's discuss. Lateral sphincterotomy. Lateral sphincterotomy is a process, a surgical procedure that is done for chronic fissures or refractory fissures, and we do not tend to do it on females because females, sphincter complex of females is slightly more delicate than men. So they tend to get more incontinence, especially when they are multiparous with lateral sphincterotomy. That's the last resort probably. So we tend not to do. And the other thing is we do sphincterotomy if the sphincter is very tight. And if the sphincter is lax, despite having the fissure, we do not do LIS, lateral sphincterotomy. So that's obviously not the best option for a female. Yes, we do it as probably the late resort, but it's not the best option for this lady at present. Okay, somebody's telling something. F, just 2% diltiazem cream, that would be the best option for this patient. Let's go one by one. Botox injections, again, that is an option for recurrent, refractory, and chronic fissures. We inject Botox to the internal sphincter so that it relaxes, it improves healing, and then the Botox action goes away from in about 3 to 3 months. And the recurrence rate, there is a recurrence rate, but that is an option again for fissures when the sphincter pressure is high. Fissurectomy out of practice, it had been a treatment not done anymore as a sole procedure. They excise the fissure. It's not commonly done, so it's out of the question. Anal advancement flap is for refractory cases, low pressure sphincters, and especially for females if the fissure is recurrent or chronic. So, and this is the first presentation, so it's not the best option. Laxatives, yes, an adjuvant treatment, but not the best option for this at the moment. 2% diltiazem, yes, it's a calcium channel antagonist. Smooth muscle relaxants, it improves healing. About 60% healing rate in 60% fissures heal in about 6 months' time. So diltiazem cream 2% is the option. 4% GTN, again a smooth muscle relaxant, but I have given you a trick that GTN causes headache and this lady has migraine. So you might find such a thing, okay? But that's also a correct answer. But headache, bad headache is a very common problem with GTN problem. So you have a fissure and you give GTN and you have headache and problem in both things now, okay? MDA out of practice, manual dilatation of anus had been there when I was registered, it was there in 2012, it was there, not anymore. So the answer is F. Okay, so this is virtually all the management options, anecdotal as well as current for fissure treatment. Okay. So 31-year-old man with ulcerative colitis was admitted with 10 times a day blood and mucus stools, in fact diarrhea. He was febrile 38 degrees C and heart rate was 112. So he's tachycardic, having fever. Blood pressure 110/70, hemoglobin 8, low hemoglobin, ESR 100, albumin 24. He's severely sick, right? He was treated and remained the same. Abdominal X-ray shows dilated colon and lactates were 4. So lactate, usual lactate level is 2. I know you are going to cry, but just remember, okay? Lactate was 4, best management option. 30 seconds, guys, 30 seconds. I started with 131 students and only 99 remaining now. People have vanished. A laparotomy, subtotal colectomy. Yes, that is the answer. That is the answer. So this is a significant severe sepsis, severe illness, more than 8 times diarrhea, heart rate more than 100, fever, hemoglobin less than 10, ESR high, albumin less than 28. These are features of severe illness. It's called true love and Wickes criteria. True love and Wickes criteria. So this shows severe illness. So it's an emergency and the colon is dilated. This is toxic megacolon. Laparotomy, subtotal colectomy, and endoileostomy is the option. Rectal ASA and steroid for moderate flare-ups. Continue IV steroids for moderate flare-ups. Nil by mouth TPN, not an option because the patient had dilated colon and toxemia. Those are for reasonably less severe diseases. Laparoscopic assisted restorative proctoclectomy, no option for laparoscopy in an emergency in this sort of a ill patient. Restorative proctocolectomy is, guys, you remove the colon, remove the rectum, and create a pouch from ileostomy and anastomosis. And usually these procedures are staged and they are done in well patients as elective procedures. They are not done in emergencies. They are not done in people who have low hemoglobin, low albumin, or leak rate. They have high leak rate and they can die. And they are not done in septic patients. So it's an elective procedure for well patients as definitive treatment for ulcerative colitis. They remove the colon, remove the rectum, create a pouch from ileum, and anastomosis to the anus. Okay. IV cyclophosphamide therapy for 3 days. Yes, it is an option if the patient did not have this dilated colon and blah, blah. Severe illness can be treated. If the patient was not this significantly ill, this is an option, but this is the best answer. This is an option, but the question says that the patient is ill. Increased dose of oral ACE for mild flare-ups. Mild to moderate flare-ups, they do it. So the answer is A. That's how we think, okay? Try to find the best answer. Right, 45-year-old man was investigated for rectal bleeding and colonoscopy biopsy confirmed adenocarcinoma 10 centimeters from anal. So it's a mid to upper rectal disease. The anal verge is 4 centimeters, so 6 centimeters from the anorectal junction. So it's rectum is 12 centimeters, so it's mid rectum. Okay. T3N1 and N0 rectal disease, rectal tumor. He is fit and well, otherwise best management option. Answers, 30 seconds. F. Good guess. D. Well, yes, D is the answer. Let's discuss anterior resection with temporary ileostomy. Anterior resection straight away is done by some people, but the current understanding is if the tumor is more than T3 and if there are evidence of lymph node metastasis on imaging, it's best to give neoadjuvant therapy to prevent local recurrence, not to improve survival of metastatic disease, but to prevent local recurrence. Neoadjuvant therapy is given. What type of neoadjuvant therapy? It's a different question, but neoadjuvant therapy is given. What the HO, SHO should do, okay, there's a tumor and CT says it is T3. Okay, this patient should not be listed. We got to inform the boss, seeing that whether he wants this patient to go to oncology or neoadjuvant. That's how you think, right? That's what you think when you are when you have started working, right? So anti-resection with temporary ileostomy straight away is not done for tumors more than T2. And abdominoperineal resection is done for very bulky tumors if the pelvis is not accessible and the tumor is low and the sphincter complex is non-salvageable, or the patient is already incontinent, or the sphincter complex is involved. So abdominoperineal resection is out of the question here given detail. We do not know whether the patient is incontinent already, but normally people are not incontinent. Okay, that's how you right? So abdominal TAMIS is too. This is too high to do a transanal minimally. It's in the upper. So they are usually for lower rectal disease, TAMIS, and superficial disease. Neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy followed by surgery. Yes, for T3 tumors with node positive disease, neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy followed by surgery is the best option. Neoadjuvant radiotherapy followed by this is being trialed, but it is not done. This is not done. Chemoradiotherapy only is the option. Radiotherapy is given in salivary situations. AR followed by adjuvant chemotherapy, correct. But the best answer is this. AR followed by chemoradiotherapy could be correct. In some centers, they still do that. They do that. They are so confident in doing. For example, the place that I last worked, the Basingstoke hospital, they never do neoadjuvant. They do just do. They are experts in resection of rectum, and they do AR straight away and then send to. So they just argue that their results are very good. But currently accepted standard is the D. Okay, we are not Basingstoke guys. Okay. Okay. Patient, 60-year-old male patient present with LIA pain. Guys, 15 minutes we have, 15 minutes. Present with LIF pain since 3 days with loose stools and mucus discharge. Okay, 60-year-old, diseases of old age, cancer, diverticular disease, blah, blah, blah. Since 3 days. With loose stools and mucus discharge. Okay, loose stools, TB, infective, inflammatory, diverticular, that sort of thing. Mucus discharge, polyps, diverticular disease, infective, inflammatory, and inflammatory bowel disease. He is too old. That's how we think. Okay. He was peritonitic, so tender guarding, rebound on LIF. Temperature 38. He has fever, some sort of inflammation, systemic inflammation. Heart rate 110, some systemic inflammation. White cell 19,000, infected, definitely. Neutrophil, bacteria. Okay, CT scan reveals features of acute sigmoid diverticulitis with pericolic fluid collection. That's one adjunct option. Okay, guys, 30 seconds. Quick, 30 seconds. Don't be in a hurry, though, but learn to be quick. Now 98 students, one has gone now. Are they sleeping or are they doing a group work? We have lost about 34 people at the MCQ bit. Okay, somebody is answering E. Emergency sigmoid colectomy and anastomosis. Good guess, good guess. Someone is answering B. IV antibiotics and supportive care and observation. Very good guess. What happened? Very good, very good. Someone is telling B again. Someone is telling E. Emergency sigmoid colectomy. All right. Any more answers? Right. This is diverticular disease, diverticulitis, and it is in fact by definition emergency ileostomy. Someone is saying. Right. Okay. There is a so diverticular disease. If it is only symptom pain and bit of bowel habit change, it is understood now that it is due to inflammation, not infection. So mild flare-ups of diverticular disease, mild episodes of diverticular disease without any systemic symptom of toxicity are managed with analgesics only. And if the diverticulitis has pericolic collections, there is a classification which I'm not going to tell you. In that situation, the treatment option is, first treatment option is IV antibiotics, pain relief. IV antibiotics, pain relief. And if the patient remains toxic, we go to reassess if the patient had developed abscesses. And if the abscesses are there, you go to drain them radiologically. Drain them radiologically. Drain them radiologically. And if the patient has perforation, peritonitic, generalized peritonitis, severe sepsis, then there are options for operation. And if the patient, if the surgeon is experienced, they can do laparoscopic washouts, or else they can go for open Hartmann operations or laparoscopic Hartmann operations. That means they remove the disease bit, close the distal bit, and take that. And some people, they remove the diseased bit, wash the colon out, and anesthetic. All those options are available. We are got to select the best option for this patient. So that this patient has some sort of infective features. So ultrasound guided drainage of the collection, it is done when there are abscesses. It's not the pericolic fluid collection. Around the colon, there are inflammatory fluid, but it's not a definite abscess. That's how they say there is a classification, right? Called Hinche, modified Hinche classification. You don't need to remember that. That's a postgraduate question. You just don't exert your brain on by remembering these stuff. Okay? Those are not needed. If you're going to tell that, you will be down marked. So he's not telling to be down mark, but try not to exert yourself on these details. IV antibiotics and supportive care is the best option here. Analgesics and observation is for milder disease. So if the patient did not have fever, tachycardia, severe leukocytosis, then this option. Emergency Hartmann, valid option if the patient is not responding to initial antibiotic therapy, valid option. Emergency sigmoid small bowel content with the piled up set of poo in the colon. That wouldn't do any good. So it's not an option. Ileostomy just divert new feces, but old feces will continue to be there. If it leaks, it leaks. So ileostomy is not an option. Endoscopic decompression of the colon cannot be. It is done for volvulus. Okay. Laparoscopic portion, valid option if the patient is not responding. For this patient, initially antibiotics and supportive care
Seems like Dr. Vasula got disconnected. Just hold on, I will reconnect. Just hold on for 2-3 minutes. Dr. Vasul is having some difficulty in getting connected. Yes, when he tries to get connected, it's getting rejected. It seems I'll contact the TRC and see. Hmm? For accepting our invitation and doing this wonderful case-based discussion on a case of rectal bleeding. In fact, when we were discussing as to whom we are going to give this lecture, Dr. Buddhika and I had a discussion, and Dr. Vasula's name came up, and without any hesitation, we decided that we should give it to him because he has always been a close friend of the Peradeniya Surgical Fraternity, and he has always come out without any hesitation to help out students, and even in postgraduate teaching in the US, he has been a very helpful resource person. So I would like to thank Dr. Vasula again for spending his valuable time and conducting this discussion today. Thank you. Good night, everyone.